Welcome back to the Afterword, a conversation about the future of words. We are talking about African American military members, particularly the history of African American involvement in the U.S. military. We have our guests, J.P. Miller, an author, and Vanessa Molden, Museum Operations and Education Manager at the African American Military History Museum. So we want to talk about what are the stories of African American military history and how we can tell them well. African American people make up about 21% of the military, but according to the numbers that I found, they make up 12.4% of the total population of the U.S. If those numbers are accurate, why do you think Black Americans are overrepresented in the military? Do you think that means we've done a particularly good job of telling military stories in that community?
Well, I think we have work to do. We've made headway, but I do believe that one of the reasons why that there's a overrepresentation of African Americans in the military is it goes back to they see it as an opportunity to make up a living for their families, and a lot of them can't afford college, so they view the military as a means to going to college or providing that avenue for them to get a college degree.
This is anecdotal, but when my son was in the Army, a lot of folks were immigrants. A lot of people who were in basic training with him or in advanced training were immigrants. And I said, why are all these people here from Nepal and Mexico and all these other countries? And it was the same thing. He said, well, two reasons. A lot of folks say, well, I get an opportunity to be a U.S. citizen and I want to serve. And thanks for that. But also what you were just saying, this is an opportunity to be able to go to college and pay my way through. JP, did you want to jump into that with something?
Yeah, sure. I think I would also like to add that in some cases, this is the direction that educators and guidance counselors are leading our young African-American students toward. And maybe not necessarily even, yes, the college is an option that they can go to college once they get there. But I think that they're, in some cases, being told that this is a way to come from certain living conditions that you may be in. And so you can call it fortunate or unfortunately, but I think that is the case in a lot of cases, especially on the enlisted side, is that these young people are being encouraged to do that. Not that it's a bad thing to go into the military, but I think that more options could be shown to them as well.
That's an excellent point, JP, and that really brings us into our next question. And Vanessa, you kind of tipped your hat a little bit to this one a bit with the nurse story, with the stereotypes of Ruth being that nurse in World War II who was not allowed to treat American soldiers. So, that's a stereotype. That is a barrier, if you will. And so I'm going to ask you first, Vanessa, what are some of the stereotypes you have seen in the history that you have shared, and how can we transform that stereotype into some of those true stories and those accurate stories that you mentioned last time?
Well, some of the stereotypes that we see is that, that the African Americans could only be cooks or wash clothes or load supplies and things like that. And I think if as we said, we tell the story accurately. And of course, when we tell it is also important. And although some African Americans did serve in those roles, they went on to do other things, and not lessening those roles, because those roles are needed. But typically, those are the roles that we hear that they served in, the kind of the support roles. And a lot of times they they weren't skilled enough. They didn't have the fortitude and all of that. But history tells us differently if we tell history accurately.
Ooh, well said. How about you, JP?
Yeah, I agree, and it's kind of like the if you remember the quarterback years ago, you didn't see African American quarterbacks because it was believed that the African American couldn't think fast enough to make a decision on the field. And so I think that carried over into our military, that African Americans couldn't be leaders. Even if they were officers in many of the wars, there would still be a white officer that would be over that company, or if there were enlisted groups, there would be a white officer that would actually be giving them direction and what to do and when to do it, as though or as if African Americans weren't intelligent enough to be able to make those decisions. And I think General Colin Powell did a lot to change that narrative during Desert Storm, with him standing on that stage and fielding answers and keeping the American public informed. And even afterwards, he was a Black man that had made it to general, and you very rarely even heard of that rank in the African American ranks. So I think that's one of the stereotypes that, that the military has had to work really hard to do away with.
Yeah. So how do you want this to be transformed? What would be the action step?
Yeah, I mean, African Americans, they take the tests. They go through the same training that all the other officers and enlisted individuals do. So just, look at them for what they bring to the table in terms of leadership, management, and that's what everyone else is doing, for the other races. So why not just look at that, across the board?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Vanessa?
Yeah, and I agree. And the way we transform is to tell the story and tell it to everybody. Yeah. And sometimes we want to get in our little bubbles and in those comfortable places, and don't want to go to the uncomfortable places to tell the story. But I think we need to break out of the bubbles that we tend to find ourselves in and sometimes choose to be in, and really go to uncomfortable places and have uncomfortable conversations.
I love it. Thank you.
Well, let's look at the military a little bit more broadly now. I know the military has changed a lot in recent years, and probably World War II veterans, maybe even Gulf War veterans, wouldn't recognize a lot of things about today's Army or Air Force. How can we talk intelligently to the next generation about what it means to protect your country and your freedom and your way of life, especially if you aren't sure that you value those things?
I would just say, by example, when I returned from Desert Storm, and I'm getting goosebumps now, when I returned from Desert Storm, I came through Bangor, Maine, and there was a sea of Vietnam veterans that greeted us. And they had everything that we could imagine. There was bands, and there was yellow ribbons that they gave us, and there was food. And I asked one gentleman, I was like, wow, this is really amazing what you guys have done. And they said, we wanted to do for you what had not been done for us. And so I say, as a military veteran myself, what I can do with these young people that are going in the military now is just support them. I know it's different from when I went in and when I served in Desert Storm, but I can still empathize with some things because some things are just not going to change. But just be there for them. Just like the Vietnam veterans was there for me, then I can be there for the next generation of veterans.
What do you think, Vanessa?
I agree with JP to be the example, because for an example, we have here at the museum, as we're educating young people about African Americans in the military, we have a scavenger hunt. And so we divide them into groups, and then they have to pretend that they are part of a battalion or whatever. And then they also have a captain, and then they have, their fellow soldiers. And so we give them instructions. And so at the end, they go through the process, and then we determine which group got the most answers correct to the scavenger hunt. And I recall that one group we had, they actually got the most questions correct, but they didn't follow instructions. They didn't put their name on the paper. And of course, they was crushed. They thought they should still win. And we were fortunate enough that day to actually have one of our veterans here with us on that day. And I said, Lieutenant Colonel, it's your time to chime in. I said, give them an example. If they were out in the field and they were responsible for a group that had been given orders or instructions to do something and they didn't. And so I think those type of examples, we try to assimilate like real world examples into whatever education that we do here, and then, give them real world examples. This is how it is.
I almost want to be a fly on the wall for that educational experience and watch their faces as they were listening. I imagine they will never forget that lesson.
I imagine they will. Yeah, they were very disappointed.
But you know what, though? This is a little bit what we were talking before about telling the stories from our first episode and telling them well, and sometimes having to explain the flaws as well, right?
Yes.
I mean, we don't often learn from the positives, unfortunately. I really wish I did. We learn from the hard lessons. And so what great opportunities that you're giving with these students, and JP with your books as well.
It's about an 8-hour drive from here to Hattiesburg, Amy.
No problem. Hey.
I'm just looking it up. I'm like, that looks like an interesting museum. How far is it to Hattiesburg?
Well, my daughter was born in Jackson, Mississippi. So,
okay.
We need a road trip back down there at some point. Definitely.
I know. In Atlanta and pick me up.
Okay, JP, we're on.
But like I said, we're extending the invitation to all of you.
Excellent. And all of our listeners. Wonderful.
Yeah, we actually just had a veteran come from Atlanta that participated in, she's actually a nurse, and she participated in our Black History Month program. So like I said, we're extending the invitation.
Wonderful. Well, we are definitely going to be putting all this information in our show notes. But before we close out this episode, Vanessa, I'm going to start with you first. I would love for you to take a minute and tell us one of the stories of an African-American military leader soldier that maybe someone hasn't heard of before.
You may have heard of him because actually there's a movie being made about his story, but it is Ensign Jesse Brown, who is the first African-American naval aviator from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. He grew up here in Hattiesburg and went to the Eureka School, which is the Black school for K through 12th grade. And it's a historic building right down the street from the museum. And when he was a little boy, he would be in the cotton fields working, and he would see airplanes flying over his head. And he dreamed of being a pilot one day. And he was a very smart young man. He graduated second in his class. And because of the environment we were living in, his parents, encouraged him to go to a historically Black university. Well, he did not want to do that because he was also an athlete. And one of his mentors or role models was Jesse Owens. And Jesse Owens went to Ohio State University. And so that's where Jesse Brown wanted to go. And so he did not listen to his family. He went on to Ohio State University. And while he was there, he saw a poster where they was recruiting for flight school. And so he went into the recruiter's office and said, this is what I'm here for. Well, the recruiter kind of joked and said, a Negro at that time was the word that was being used, would never sit in the cockpit of a naval aircraft. Well, Jesse defied all odds. And like I said, he became the first African-American aviator. And unfortunately, he was killed during the Korean War. And there's a book that is written about his story called Devotion. And in October of this year, the movie Devotion will be coming out.
Ooh. Wow. This is so good. Thank you, Vanessa. Oh, that's wonderful. All right, JP, can you share another story, please?
I'm sorry. Vanessa took all of mine, so all of my heroes. But there is another gentleman that I wanted to speak on that is with the Air Force. I love going to the air shows to see the Thunderbirds and the I forgot the Army.
Blue Angels.
Blue Angels is a Navy, and
Okay, so
yeah. But anyway, just to see the air shows with all of the military, we used to have it every year. Of course, being an MWR in the recreation career field, we had to host it. And I would just like to mention General Fig. His first name is not Fig, but they called him Fig Newton. And he was the first African American to be a Thunderbird. So that is that would be my lesser known person from the Air Force that I would like to bring attention to.
I love that both of you gave us stories of aviators. I think that's phenomenal. And again, breaking through those barriers and really appreciate the stories. This is such an important thing. We need these stories accurately, timely, and they need to be with humanity. But we also need, as I said before, we just need more. We need the volume of stories needs to increase dramatically.
Also, the Tuskegee Air Museum is 4 hours from here. It's halfway. So I'm just sitting here planning a road trip over a long weekend. You could do both. You could do both museums. Like African American Military History Tour.
Excellent.
Yeah. Okay. We have one last question. What is a metaphor to help us better understand this topic?
I mean, when I think of better understanding this topic, I think of patriotism. I think one of the things that people often don't think of when it comes to African Americans and is that we're patriotic. There are a lot of things and comments made about President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama about them not being patriotic because she said something to the effect that now I feel like I'm a part of this country. And I will be the first to say that it wasn't until I went into the military that I would even put my hand over my heart when I said the Pledge of Allegiance, because at the end, when it said, and justice for all, I didn't feel that I had that justice. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a certain level of patriotism or, America is all I've known. Even though I am African American, America is all I've known. I was born here. So of course I have patriotism for this country, and I want to protect my country, and I want to protect my rights and the rights of others. So I think that's something that definitely needs to be clarified, is that just because we're African American does not mean that we're not patriotic to this nation.
A metaphor. I kind of, and when I say this, I'll certainly have to explain. I think it's kind of like an old house. I mean, African Americans have been around and serving this country from the beginning. I mean, it was, country was built on African Americans' backs, pretty much. And so in order for us to continue to tell that story and to tell it accurately, it's just like an old house. If you don't, nurture it and do the things that you need to do to it, it's going to eventually, deteriorate and go away. And that's the reason why it's so important that we continue to build on the foundation that African Americans have played since the inception of this country. And that goes by us, telling the stories accurately and timely.
Woo, Holland. These ladies knocked it out of the park.
This has been a great episode, and we have got so many little mini bios now to go and learn about all these people.
And come to Hattiesburg and learn more.
That's
Absolutely.
right. That's right. All right, JP, where can folks learn more about your work or connect with you?
Yes, if there's anyone out there that would like to contact me, you can reach me at www.authorjpmiller2020.com. And in that, I have a contact that if you write me an email, it will come directly to me. So I'd love to hear from your followers and your viewers in terms of how they enjoyed the episode or how they can get my books, Careers in the U.S. Military.
You've written an astonishing array of books and some really good topics, some really good titles, and I think some things that we aren't seeing a lot of in children's literature. Yeah. Or I guess it's called young adult literature, middle grade literature, but it's
children's. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're filling an important niche, I think. So, Vanessa, where can people find you and get more involved in what you're doing at the museum?
Well, we are located in Hattiesburg, Mississippi at 305 East 6th Street. And then also you can go to our website at hattiesburguso.com and to learn more about our museum. And then also, like I said, we're at 305 East 6th Street in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. We love for your viewers as well as you all to come visit us.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And for everyone else who is listening, next week we're going to be talking about stories and language of the unhomed.
Yeah. So this whole theme of safety has been such an important theme, from talking about identity and food to the military and now to the unhomed and poverty. And so we just thank you so much, JP and Vanessa. This has been a phenomenal conversation, one I will not forget. I have just been so encouraged by the stories that you've shared, and this has been wonderful. And so for everyone else, please leave us a review, rate us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Become a subscriber to the afterwordpodcast.com. It does help us keep the conversations going. And as always, please remember, you are welcome at our table.